Hello, I'm Jan Szrewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Now, today's episode takes us on a trip to the South Caucasus, where Armenia and Azerbaijan are making half-hearted efforts at peace talks to end the beef that goes back a long, long time, but was reignited with great intensity after the USSR fell to pieces, with the most recent flare-up briefly engulfing Nagorno-Karabakh, before Azerbaijan finally reclaimed the region as its own. Now, with bilateral talks in Kazakhstan yielding nothing beyond vague statements, a number of contentious issues still unresolved, and other regional powers having plans of their own, the region's current status is that of a friendly chat between two mortal foes brandishing flamethrowers while sitting on a stack of powder kegs. The intent may seem noble, but there is tension in the air. And it's not that hard to imagine another conflict breaking out, or one of the parties caving in under pressure and just walking away. So, let's kick things off with our latest report, and then we'll explore today's story in greater detail.
The foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan, Ararat Mirzoyan and Ceyhun Bayramov, held another round of peace talks in Almaty, Kazakhstan. The meeting lasted more than 4 hours, during which the parties discussed a draft bilateral agreement on the establishment of peace and interstate relations. On May 7th, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said Yerevan was ready to sign the peace agreement by November this year, as long as the document includes all principles previously agreed upon. Mirzoyan and Bayramov said they would continue negotiations on the prevalent issues of the peace agreement. The ministers welcomed the progress on border delimitation and the agreements reached on this issue. The conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia no longer concerns Nagorno-Karabakh, as in September, Baku regained full control over the area after more than 3 decades of existence of the Armenian Separatist Republic. After Baku's first victorious war in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, Azerbaijani soldiers began to question their internationally recognized borders of Armenia, which are partly undefined. Since 2021, Azerbaijan has been invading Armenian territory, with clashes becoming more and more common. The subject of the current dispute are border villages. 4 of the disputed villages were located on the Azerbaijani side of the border between the 2 former Soviet republics and had been occupied by Armenian forces since the 1990s. Pashinyan advocates giving up the 4 villages as the only way to avoid another war with their stronger neighbor. The Prime Minister's position on the issue has provoked opposition in the form of street protests from many citizens of the country. In recent weeks, Bagrat Galstanian, bishop of the Tavush Diocese of the Armenian Apostolic Church, has become the face of social protests against the territorial concessions.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Remember the old Megadeth album Peace Sells But Who's Buying? This admittedly epic album title could also serve as the title for today's episode. Just don't expect Vic Rattlehead to replace Ilham Aliyev or Nikol Pashinyan in the accompanying footage. In any case, peace talks seem to be a commodity that's not really in demand right now, at least not in Baku. Why is that so? Well, Ilham Aliyev is most likely finding it hard to conceal a triumphant smirk whenever thinking of his regional rival, Nikol Pashinyan, who's recently been having a rough time. Getting beaten in a regional conflict, then losing control of his crown jewel of Nagorno-Karabakh, and then having to cede a bunch of border villages to Azerbaijan, also facing fierce protests at home. This is not a position for effective peace talks, not at all. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan can reap the benefits of recent wins and continues to push Armenia further and further, rejecting mediation offers from Russia and the West alike, feeling under no pressure to make any concessions of its own. A recent analysis by the Polish Institute for International Affairs, for example, suggests Baku may even view some limited skirmishes as a viable alternative to peace talks, even if Pashinyan does his impression of Tommy Shelby running about screaming, "No fighting." To put it simple, Azerbaijan has the upper hand here, and Armenia doesn't. Now, this has caused Azerbaijan to push for a number of further concessions from Armenia, such as an extraterritorial status for the proposed Zangezur corridor. What's even worse, Turkey also wants it. And so when Armenia responded by timidly suggesting a different arrangement, no extraterritorial status, just opening cross-border transport routes and all that, Baku said it was a bit meh and turned it down. With the most recent talks in Kazakhstan ending with an inconclusive statement. Armenia and Azerbaijan agreeing to disagreeing really means Baku disagreeing and Yerevan not being able to do anything about it. Armenia dreams big of turning westwards, perhaps even an EU candidate status someday. But for the time being, the shadow of the not-so-distant past looms large over the nation and its policies. So will peace talks yield some sort of tangible result in the end? Will perhaps the European Union or the United States step in, pressurizing Azerbaijan into some sort of concessions in the very least in order to put an end to this conflict? Well, that remains an open question. And joining us now to shed more light on the issue is our guest today, Rusif Husseinov, head of the Topchubashov Center in Baku. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, which of the two countries wants these negotiations more? It does seem like Baku is not in a hurry to actually get anything done in this regard, while Armenia, well, they are a bit more desperate for some progress.
That's correct. We can obviously feel the sense of urgency in Yerevan. However, in Baku, the authorities are not in a rush. They want to solve the fundamental problems before signing a peace deal between the two countries, which is quite understandable. In the case of Armenia, however, yes, the sense of urgency persists because obviously the government in Yerevan tries to kind of get rid of this Russian influence and follow this pro-Western path by normalizing the relations with both Azerbaijan and Turkey. We are very optimistic about the upcoming peace deal, which hopefully will be signed by the end of this year.
So some people might say that this is about Azerbaijan basically, flexing its muscles, being able to take advantage of its negotiating positions. But isn't the current situation really about a very poor choice of allies on the part of Yerevan? I mean, they were standing with Russia for a while. Russia proved to be a terrible ally, totally unreliable. And now they're trying to switch the course. It's a bit of a late game, so to say, because it is not so easy to actually completely change your allegiances, change your geopolitical orientation within the span of, a couple of months. So would you say that Armenia really has this sort of tough game to play at this stage, especially since Nikol Pashinyan is also facing intense protests at home?
Well, you are right. On the one hand, Azerbaijan is clearly possessing an upper hand in the Armenia-Azerbaijan process. This is obvious. On the other hand, what Baku wants is to sideline all external powers when it comes to this normalization process. The authorities in the Azerbaijani capital, they want this process to be bilateral only, without any external interference.
So no mediators.
Which could also benefit the Armenian side as well. So right now, what we are witnessing are purely bilateral process, although these meetings can be held in different third-party capitals.
So like, for example, Kazakhstan right now, but they made it clear that they're hosting the talks, but they are not mediating so as to maintain this bilateral status, right?
That's correct. So Kazakhstan is not a mediator. It's just a facilitator, which provides a venue for the talks. But the talks by their nature are purely bilateral.
So what would you say is the most critical issue here? Would that be transport routes, the question of the Zangezur corridor, for example? How is it likely to end? Do you think that Armenia will be forced to agree to some of the proposals from Azerbaijan? They were trying to make their own proposals. Now they were fairly quickly rejected, so far as I remember. Would you say that Armenia is in such a position that it doesn't really have any aces up its sleeves when it comes to talks on this issue?
Well, there are certainly several issues which we could somehow refer to as obstacles in the normalization process. One of them is related to the border demarcation and delimitation process, which was launched some weeks ago, and some segments of the borders were demarcated properly. But there are certain areas of the Azerbaijani lands which are under the Armenian control, and the Azerbaijani side wants Armenia to address this issue. There are also territorial claims against Azerbaijan at the legislative level in Armenia. This question should also be sorted out. As for the Zangezur corridor or a direct link the Azerbaijani side wants between its mainland territory and the Nakhchivan exclave, this is an important issue, but hopefully the sides will be able to find a compromise which will benefit both Armenia and Azerbaijan, because at the end of the day, this issue, the Zangezur corridor, can also serve as a project which can help in confidence building between the parties.
This is really interesting because this is where external interests also come into play. We know that Azerbaijan's most powerful ally, Turkey, really wants this corridor, which is natural because trade opportunities there would be immense. Obviously, partners on both sides would also be interested, like China, countries located further away in Central Asia, but also Europe, right? But on the other hand, there is one country that really doesn't want this to happen, and this is Iran. So could Armenia potentially derive any profit from this very unusual ally that it has, at least in this regard? Would it be able to use this fact in the negotiations in any way that would be beneficial for its own cause?
Well, this is an interesting question, very, very interesting, because yes, you are right. At regional level, Azerbaijan wants it because it needs a direct route to the Nakhchivan exclave. If we speak about the geo-economic aspect of this corridor, it can be an important segment of the so-called middle corridor, which is designed to connect Asia with Europe. However, as you rightfully mentioned, Iran is against this and has drawn the Zangezur corridor as its red line. Therefore, no matter how much Azerbaijan or Turkey, to some extent, Russia wanted, and I guess some circles in Armenia can also be okay with the Zangezur corridor if it's under the Armenian control. But we are yet to learn how Iran will react if the Zangezur corridor will ever open, because Armenia is Iran's only route northward to Georgia and to the Black Sea. Therefore, the Iranian side is really sensitive about the Zangezur corridor. And also, the second aspect is that if the Zangezur corridor ever opens, it can also damage Iran's monopoly over the route between Azerbaijan and Turkey. This is what Tehran doesn't want to lose.
Now, would you agree with a statement that was made in an analysis by one of the Polish institutes specializing in foreign policy? They basically said that there is a risk that Azerbaijan could consider some sort of limited confrontation as a viable alternative. If the negotiations simply don't go anywhere, they might actually launch some sort of limited military operation just to put pressure on Armenia. Do you think we're still sitting on a powder keg here and some kind of conflict could erupt in the near future if the negotiations are not successful?
Well, I remember last year in fall, many international media outlets and political circles falsely alerted the international community about the alleged Azerbaijani assault on Armenia proper, which was not the case. No one was seriously discussing in Azerbaijan about such a scenario. What Azerbaijan wants from Armenia now are several villages which are de jure Azerbaijani lands, but are currently controlled by Armenia. Yes, there can be some confrontation over those villages. However, attacking Armenia proper would be a risky game for Azerbaijan, and I don't think the political establishment in Baku would seriously consider that.
And you've mentioned legal issues here. And before that, you also said that Armenia has legislation which makes claims towards land belonging to Azerbaijan. Are you referring perhaps to the constitutional provisions which basically provide that Armenia will be reunited with Nagorno-Karabakh? And let's not forget, Nagorno-Karabakh was, from a standpoint of international law, a part of Azerbaijan, not Armenia. So this state of affairs that we were actually dealing with before Azerbaijan decided to make a move and reclaim the territory, that was not legally sanctioned by anyone. I mean the so-called Artsakh, it was not recognized internationally. It was a quasi-state. So does Armenia still maintain the pretense that it still wants to get this territory back, at least, on the legislative level?
Well, this is a source of concern for us because, yes, you are right. It's a constitutional problem. The preamble of the Armenian constitution refers to Armenia's 1990 Declaration of Sovereignty, which indicates the unification of Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh. So technically, you can change, you can amend, even terminate the constitution, but you cannot terminate the Declaration of Sovereignty, which by legal standards, stands above the constitution. So this poses a serious question and also concern for us how Armenia will address this issue, because someday some revanchist forces in Armenia can come to power and then revive these territorial claims against Azerbaijan by referring to the constitution's preamble or the declaration of sovereignty. What are we going to do in that scenario? Therefore, in order to prevent any possible revanchist scenarios, any possible confrontation between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the future, we really want the Armenian side to address this issue.
So obviously these peace talks are going to be difficult, and it remains to be seen whether some result will actually appear towards the end. Nevertheless, this is a truly fascinating story, one of a conflict that has been around for quite a while, but which still is likely to cast a long shadow even after the talks come to an end. Rusif Husseinov was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now it's time for Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. The Archbishop of the Armenian Apostolic Church, who has been protesting the territorial concessions of the Armenian government to Azerbaijan, demanded the resignation of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan during a rally in Yerevan, attended by tens of thousands of supporters. Archbishop Bagrat Galstanian staged the largest anti-government demonstration in Armenia in 7 years, with thousands of protesters under his leadership marching into the capital.
Pashinyan's government aims to cede 4 Armenian villages to Azerbaijan as part of developing the first section of the new Armenian-Azerbaijani border. Many local residents strongly oppose the transfer, saying it would isolate their communities and expose them to Azerbaijani attacks. Bishop Galstanian, who heads the Diocese of Tavush of the Armenian Apostolic Church, once again condemned what he called an illegal attempt to reassign the land. During the rally, the Armenian Archbishop told the participants he would be willing to become a PM candidate. Current Prime Minister Pashinyan accused the protesters of trying to provoke another war with Azerbaijan in the hope of overthrowing him. He claimed that Azerbaijan would invade Armenia if the latter stopped the land transfer.
Russian leader Vladimir Putin nominated Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Belousov for the position of Russian Minister of Defense and appointed the former head of the ministry, Sergei Shoigu, as chairman of the Russian Security Council. Consequently, Putin's close associate Nikolai Patrushev lost his position in the Kremlin inner circle.
The reshuffle in the Russian government follows the swearing-in of Vladimir Putin for a fifth term as president. Simultaneously, Russian attacks in the northeastern region of Ukraine are intensifying. Belousov was the first deputy prime minister in Mikhail Mishustin's previous government. Previously, he was Putin's economic advisor for many years, as well as Minister of Economy for a year. Sergei Shoigu has served as defense minister since 2012. Now, according to Putin's plan, he is to take the position of chairman of Russia's Security Council. Since 2008, the post has been occupied by Nikolai Patrushev. The Kremlin has stated that it will announce Patrushev's new role in the coming days.
Tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets of Tbilisi over the weekend. The demonstrators staunchly opposed the controversial so-called foreign agents law. Local media report of about 50,000 demonstrators being present.
Protesters gathered at the European Square in the center of Tbilisi. Despite the rain, the demonstrators did not give up, holding Georgian and European flags, chanting "Georgia, Georgia." Local media claim there were problems with access to the internet and telephone networks in the areas where protesters gathered. Georgian police arrested 20 people as they violently dispersed a rally outside parliament as lawmakers from the ruling Georgian Dream Party pushed through the approval of a controversial foreign agents law, seen by many as a threat to free speech and the country's drive towards the European Union. On 1st of May, the Georgian parliament approved the draft law in the second reading. Despite appeals from the EU and the US, the Georgian Dream Party, which has a majority in parliament, does not intend to give up the law.
Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova, the new president of North Macedonia, refused to use the full name of the country during her official swearing-in ceremony. All she said was Macedonia. The adoption of the name North Macedonia settled a long-standing dispute between Skopje and Athens in 2018.
As part of the 2018 Prespa agreement between Macedonia and Greece, the government in Skopje agreed to change the country's name to allay Athens' concerns about possible territorial claims against the northern Greek Aegean country of Macedonia. The decision was required to open the way for Macedonians to join the European Union and NATO. North Macedonia joined the North Atlantic Alliance in 2020, but its negotiations with the EU are blocked by Bulgarian demands over the status of the Bulgarian minority in the country. The parties involved in the formation of the new government identified commitment to the EU accession process as a priority and the basis of the coalition agreement. Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova is the first woman to become president of North Macedonia.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.